topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity, which sometimes includes talking about the world, environment, climate, which today's show will be enormously educational on. I've learned so much from our guest already in just a very short period of time as I tried to prepare for this conversation. Before I introduce Richard Hughes, who will be our guest today, I wanted to just mention, if people are interested in seeing programs I offer as a trainer, a coach, a diversity educator, you can find my programs, some of them. There's always more, and I can always tailor them for organizations or individuals on my website, which is knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com. So the title of today's show is The Health of the Planet Matters. And our guest is Richard Hughes, who you will hear me call Rick. Rick, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate you taking the time and already just expanding my understanding of ecosystems and the connection between ecosystems health and human health.
Well, I'm happy to be here. It was great to see you in October, and nice to be able to chat with you tonight.
And thanks to Rick, I got to see a bunch of Peace Corps volunteers. That was you organized an amazing reunion. So Rick and I also met through the Peace Corps network, and I'm grateful that we're all staying connected. And I want to just do a little what I can remember from your bio, that you've spent 30 years working, and I'm gonna go get it in front of me so I am accurate. Oh, it's 30 years working to improve public health and biodiversity conservation in developing countries in Asia and Africa, working for Johns Hopkins University and the World Wildlife Fund, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And you lived and worked in some of the poorest countries in the world. And you talk about having an opportunity that you experienced firsthand the essential roles that ecosystem services play when it comes to human health and security, like food systems, watersheds, air quality, managing waste, dealing with health systems. I'm so impressed by your vast the knowledge you must have.
It's been fun doing it. But yeah, the interesting thing, and you know, in your work and your show on diversity and equity, a lot of the impacts of this are on those who are least fortunate and have the least means to deal with or mitigate some of the challenges that present themselves. They were really dependent on the world around them. We all are, but some people feel it more closely than others. So yeah, I spent we both were in the Peace Corps some time back in Nepal, and that did prompt me to continue working in international development and developing countries. I went back and worked in Nepal, and little did I know it, I always thought I'd be in Asia because I love Asia, I love Nepal, but I ended up going to Africa, West Africa, and Guinea, and Southern Africa, and Zambia, and then Madagascar. And 16 years later, I was still in Africa. So, but it, you know, for me, it was certainly a fantastic career and opportunity to get to know people, do good work, and really, for me, support the people in those countries who are trying to make a difference. but the topic, the topic today that I want to talk about is planetary health, and with we often kind of get siloed into the work we do, and a lot of my work was in public health, really working with health systems, working with governments to improve care at hospitals, health centers, in communities, change health policy and other things. But I do have a background in environmental science, and just out of personal interest, when I have free time, that's where I go. I go to the mountains, I go to the forest, go to the ocean. I enjoy the natural world, and I had the opportunity to kind of make a transition to conservation and run the WWF program for the West Indian Ocean. Living in Madagascar, it's just fascinating. I mean, it's such a unique place with such great biodiversity. But one of the questions I often get asked is what country do you like the most? I can't tell you. I like them all, and a lot of it has to do with the people, but also the environment, the conditions, the work. But planetary health it's trying to get at the bigger picture, at where we are now, and understanding that human health and civilization, really, we depend on the health of the Earth's systems, and we're not taking care of them. We're over exploiting, overusing, and we're at a point where technological solutions aren't necessarily going to be able to correct us. We've got to make some real hard choices,
like policy wise and human practice habit wise.
At every level, really. We have to start taking a hard look. I'm a parent. I've got kids. I think about what their future is. I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners, do the same. And I'm optimistic in the sense that I have a lot of faith in humanity and the humanity of the next generation. I recognize we have not set them up well for success, and there's a price to be paid for decisions that we've made, our parents made, and the growth. But the Earth as a natural system, like anything else, it's not a bottomless pit. It has a finite resources. It has the air, the water, the minerals. And it's a tremendously complex, interdependent system. And I think that's something that people have trouble often have trouble really understanding. And people who are what I would say more pro-growth and not too interested in the environment. I often get questions of what does it matter to me if there's a particular frog in the Andes that lives or dies? How does that affect my life? One of the greatest examples would be mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Who likes mosquitoes? Other than maybe a few entomologists, but they carry disease. They're where we get the name pest from. But they're immensely important in the system in terms of the amount of just protein, biomass that bats, birds, depend on, and that interconnected web of nature. It's we have a lot of hubris when we try to engineer it.
I love that interconnected web of nature. And you also said earlier the interdependence. And it's funny because when you say like human life depends on the health of the planet, on one level it's like, well, of course, that's so simple. But on another level it's like, oh my gosh, how much it's what's in our education in the West, in North America, to in the U.S. part, I was educated a little bit in North Africa, but mostly in the U.S. That was not brought to my awareness in my public education years or in my college years.
Not typically. I mean, you get a little bit in biology and basic earth sciences and the food web and the chain, but I mean, you look at our oceans, and so many people are dependent on the oceans for food. But they're more important than all the forests on dry land in terms of the carbon system. The kelp forests, the seagrasses, the corals, they're immensely important. And between changing climate, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because the ocean is what drives our weather patterns. The acidification, the changing of the carbon balance that changes the makeup of the ocean, the harvesting of most of the fish that humans consume are at the top of the food chain. They're tuna and mackerel, they're predators. They eat other fish, they eat smaller fish, and when you take those out of the system starts to fail. And we've seen that. We saw that when we had the major fires in Yellowstone, and people were highly concerned, and so much of it burned, but it came back. And we've seen it with beavers being reintroduced into systems to engineer. They're such great engineers in terms of changing the landscape in a positive way for so many other types of species. And with wolves, when we took wolves out of the equation, deer populations grew. The deer ate down the grasses. They ate the shrubs. So these systems, the balance in them is intricate, and we do depend on them. We think about the tonnage of fish harvest that's taken out for human consumption. The dependence on our agriculture on arable land that's not been so used up that it's no longer productive, and the water systems, and that's a whole nother issue. The fresh water to drink, the water to irrigate, and we're seeing all of those things change.
What's coming to my mind is from an article that you sent me, very many pages. I guess the Rockefeller Foundation funded it, from the Lancelot Commission, and just saying, and please add to this, that these striking trends are driven by highly inequitable, inefficient, and unsustainable patterns of resource consumption and technological development, together with population growth. Can you just expand on that more, like maybe with some more examples?
We've been having a sort of a poorly designed growth of both. At the same time, raw population, just numbers of people on the planet, has been growing, and it will reach a point where it levels off. Unfortunately, that point is probably beyond what the Earth can supply in terms of the things we rely on from the Earth for that size of population right now, without some changes. At the same time, each individual is consuming more. They're consuming more, whether you look at food or you look at other products, and you look at products and product cycle, the energy that goes into producing them, the carbon footprint, the waste that's generated, and the impact that waste management has. So that consumption combined with population growth, at the end of the day, you've got exponential growth in the utilization of the planet and the utilization of natural resources that's more than just the population growth. But that consumption, while you see consumption growing across most levels of the economic sphere, far and away the concentration of wealth at the very top and the immense consumption of a few. And that's true whether you look at countries, at the very rich countries versus poorer countries, and whether you look at individuals and the real concentration of wealth in individuals or corporations, you're seeing the same thing where this wealth accumulation and consumption that's so far beyond sustainable. It's so far beyond what's needed, in my opinion, for a healthy and happy life. That level of inequity, it's exacerbating the problems. I'm not sure that it's the cause of the problem, but it certainly makes it worse, and the, as I said before, the impacts are unequitably distributed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as you said earlier, that the worst environmental sites of toxins are located near the most vulnerable populations in this country as well as other countries.
Typically because their voice is simply not as powerful in the systems we live in. Mm-hmm. And so their ability to shape those decisions is compromised.
I just want to let the listeners and viewers know Rick is definitely going to talk about what we could do about a hopeful perspective and things we can do. But there's a couple more things I want to at least kind of flesh out a little bit more that I've learned from Rick. So one is the contradiction between, or apparent contradiction, there's probably a better word, of human health. I don't know if this is since the funding for USAID and has been abruptly stopped for the time being. Let's pray, I say. You mentioned to me earlier, human health has gotten better over time. The deterioration of the earth has increasingly gotten worse. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, we're again, the climate is part of it, but other issues equally. Are in a position potentially to roll back some of the gains in human health and life expectancy and quality of life at many different levels, and it will certainly be inequitably distributed at the beginning, and the poorest, those with least resources and most dependent on natural systems, are most vulnerable.
Tragic.
The food production, fresh water, just temperature. You look at maternal health, child health. There's a lot of research going on, but small changes in the ambient temperature where people live have an impact on survival. And so hard-fought gains may get rolled back. Diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes, other vectors that transmit disease between people, their patterns are changing. They're changing again for many of the same reasons, whether it's changing in climate, desertification, changes in water systems. So mosquito populations, types of mosquitoes will move, and we'll see them. Waterborne diseases, same thing. Floods, cyclones that disrupt water systems, disrupt sanitary systems. They then will have consequences on health of those populations. Nutrition, all of those systems, again, they're very interconnected and very, very interlinked, and you're already seeing increases in conflict, in humanitarian crisis, in refugees, people who are leaving places that are becoming less and less livable. And that's sort of where we're at. And I think, in terms of not being pessimistic, the first part of a solution starts with starting to understand the context and starting to understand the problem, and then beginning to see, even if it's just me, an individual, what are the things that the steps that I can do to change, be as positive as possible in terms of my impact.
Great. And before we moved kind of to the individual level, besides yourself, like who are the people, the organizations, who understand, who have this understanding and who are able to coordinate? Like, that's a massive worldwide coordination effort to communicate across like ecological services and protection and all these systems you're talking about. Are there?
Yeah, fortunately, unfortunately, large-scale changes are going to require governments. They're going to require governments to make hard choices and make decisions. Governments are only going to do that if their constituents and their people make that not just okay, but required. So it will end up coming back to people. The United Nations organizations, they're like you said, they're under stress. The U.S. was a major funder, has withdrawn a fair bit of funding, but many other countries are fully engaged and support them. So the UN agencies, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, the Health Organization, the World Health Organization, these organizations are large conveners. They help to set frameworks and policy that can help influence and guide individual countries on their decisions. We are seeing, we're seeing transition in energy production in many places, and that includes some of the poorest countries in the world, partly because it just makes sense. It's finally getting to a point where it makes economic sense. And other types of local solutions, microgrid, smaller scale production, but big changes will rely on governments. Governments are going to have to be pushed to make some of these decisions. We've seen it time and again when you look at the climate conferences and other things, where the biodiversity conferences, where we rarely meet the expectations of what could, or some would say what must be done. There are a lot of universities. So the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet series, it was about 10 years ago, kind of started this push for a bigger vision of planetary health. This idea that we can't keep focusing on the silo of just trying to work on just human civilization without seeing what are all the interdependencies there. And as we see greater population coming into closer contact with wild animal populations because of expansion, again, consumption. So each person living on a larger plot of land, there's less land, you end up in closer proximity to animals, and you have greater opportunities for diseases that are common in the wild animal populations to transmit to humans. And you see this in really serious diseases in Ebola. You've got avian influenza. You've got a variety of zoonotic, animal based diseases that transfer to humans and create human health problems. You've got pandemic diseases of various types, which may or may not have had animal origins, but become a major issue in human populations. And so, all of these different bodies need to come together. The planetary health movement does have some foothold in some of the major universities. And universities are nice in a sense because big universities are multidisciplinary. And so, some of the effort is just trying to get across the university, trying to get the engineering department and the health programs and the nursing programs and the environmental programs, to begin to come together and see where they have some common ground and opportunity in these areas.
Yeah, that's a very logical place, universities, to just like talk across.
But there's globally there are hundreds of organizations. The Planetary Health Alliance is one sort of umbrella group that sort of grew out of that Rockefeller Lancet work, and it works now. I think it's across 80 countries or so. With all different, there are universities in these countries, but there are also small nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations who are working on different aspects of the issues, and you need to pull. Everybody can't do everything, so you kind of need to pull different voices in together and see where you can work together.
Well, gosh, I just got a spark of hope.
Yeah,
because it's true. I mean, go ahead.
Can't give up. No, there's there's a lot of human ingenuity. And I think when you get certainly down to individual level, community level, there's a lot of opportunity for people to pull together. And I think we need to push that envelope and exploit that in a sense, and get back to a greater sense of commonality and perhaps a little bit less individual.
Yes, particularly in the West, as they say. I was thinking about earlier how just the quality of empathy, when it's lacking in leadership or lacking in government policies, what a massive negative impact it can have, and how grateful I am that there are so many human beings who do really care and do have empathy and do care about community and are using voices not only for themselves but for their community and for less powerful communities. So I appreciate what you're saying about people are ingenuitive, resourceful, and curious, and really don't want to give up.
Well, the curious thing sometimes for me is that you have the same individuals who have both qualities, and depending on the context, and so part of the question then is how do we really bring out that empathy and caring, and not just empathy and caring for other people, but that element also, I think, is really integral to happiness. It's integral to personal satisfaction. Whereas the other side we see sometimes of the negativity, of the volatility, the tendency towards violence in speech and violence in behavior. There's no happiness.
I agree.
In that, So how do we really nurture our communities, in our families, and I think always the next generation, or now at our age, the next couple generations, how do we really nurture those things in sometimes difficult environments where you've got so many different influences and so many different sources of information and role models, good or bad, you're sort of everyone gets bombarded in the society we're in now.
That's true, with all the bombardment and noise and social media platforms and applications. I think, what comes to my mind is just it's so easy to be busy, or sometimes without a choice of have to work between a number of jobs, and depending on where you are, who you are, where you live, that we can forget, I think, to talk to the people that we're closest to check in, like how like not only like how are they doing, but what are they thinking, and what ideology is developing in the within them, depending on what they're reading or what they're listening to, or podcast or whatnot. And I find that it's so important to be in touch with our own family members, and sometimes that might feel like the only thing that we can do, but the hardest thing to do, to just almost like find ways to like constructively confront one another or challenge one another without like saying, I'm never talking to him again or her again because they're just wrong or stupid or whatever.
Yeah. Well, time is a precious commodity, and in our current society, it's undervalued, I think. The ability to make time for things that are important and worthwhile, where we spend a lot of time on things that are time consuming, but maybe not as important.
Right. So then you can actually just like be together.
Yeah.
And also the relationship to nature, like that grew for me so much when I was serving in the Peace Corps in Nepal, and partly because sometimes there were periods of time where there were not other people where we were. Sometimes we were very isolated between things, and sometimes we were not fluent yet in another language, and there was no one around us who spoke our first language or our second or third or whatever language. And I remembered very much turning to nature and like feeling like, oh, nature was my friend. Like looking at the mustard, plants growing and turning yellow, and just watching the rivers, and just really my appreciation for Earth as a living organism was just really came to life for me, so to speak.
There's a lot of research and a lot of evidence around the importance of time in nature, and whether it's getting out, walk in the woods, a hike, a backpack, a try, whatever level you're at, but that connection with nature, actually has concrete, measurable impact on both mental and physical health.
Absolutely. Definitely can totally change your state of mind.
It does. We're between biodiversity loss and sort of the parallel impacts of climate change. We're really at a crossroads where we need to pay attention. We talked a little bit earlier about the sort of intricate interdependence of natural systems and how important they are, and we see that I think people are familiar with the thought or the idea that forests are important from a carbon capture standpoint for climate change. But for those forests to be healthy, they've got to have a certain level of biodiversity, and they have both in plant and animal structure. They have to have a certain size, because you can't have the biodiversity without that size and connectiveness. So little parcels here and there don't function the same way that a large natural forest does. And we're losing. There are some areas where there's some gains and some increases. There have been some regain, and there's a whole movement of rewilding, which is, I think, a really important, really valuable movement. In Europe and other places, even the U.S., there's been some growth, but then you also see the pressure to go the other direction, the pressure to open up lands for more drilling, more extraction, more grazing, and we got to figure out how do we put the priority on the things that are essential, really, to the functioning of the planet. You look at the Amazon rainforest. Whether it's whichever country you're talking to, okay, we need to save the Amazon. Okay, everybody benefits from it.
Everybody.
So why do those countries only have to take action to preserve it? How do all the other countries contribute to recognizing and rewarding the value of that to everyone? Ocean systems similarly. We're losing coral reefs. We lose coral reefs. There's such a harbor for fish that are essential to the whole fish chain. If we really start to lose those, the whole food web is at jeopardy. All of the food that's taken out of the ocean is potentially problematic. How do we get balance back? We saw the cod fisheries in the North Atlantic collapse from overfishing.
Yeah.
And it took a long time, and they've managed to rebuild that to a certain extent to be a healthier and now again productive fishery with management. But it was a great example of you got to get those blinders off, and we've got to value the conservation side, not just the consumption side. Our product cycles are the same thing. We don't, nobody builds in the cost of recycling or disposing of a plastic bottle. We rent out our house sometimes, and I plead with everybody, because so often the first thing that somebody comes in, they plunk down a case of bottled water on the counter. They've gotten to the point where they think that that's safer than tap water. It's actually less regulated. It's less, and the consequences are of that plastic, of manufacturing that plastic, of moving it around. There's so many negatives there, but I see people who are essentially sort of been conditioned to, got to have that bottle of water.
Yeah, it's really astounding how long it takes for a message to get across, like a community, a state, a nation, a country. Actually, I can't remember. Go ahead.
We've been able to do it, but it's taken some concerted effort. One of the great ones in the U.S. was the work on cutting back on smoking.
True.
Concerted effort led by people at the CDC, with not complete success in terms of not wiping it out, but completely transforming our society from one where everybody smoked to one where smoking was the exception. You know,
That's true.
Australia did something similar. Their slip, slap, slap. Slip into a coverall, slap on some sunscreen, and slap on a hat. Because the ozone layer, if you remember back then when the ozone layer was being eroded with the chemicals that we were producing, and a big hole in the ozone layer was over Australia, and skin cancer was a major issue. So, you know, with concerted effort, we can impact behavior and choices, but we kind of need those drivers to do that.
That reminds me of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, another very powerful campaign that has statistically reduced drunk driving accidents and deaths. And remember, there weren't seatbelts. Remember when
Well, you know, you give people tickets, and guess what? I mean, you know, some of these campaigns are really about trying to change behavior through influencing people. Others are just, don't do it, we'll fine you. And guess what? Yeah. People did it. Yeah.
And I'm forgetting the name of the organization, but I have a neighbor here who's very much helped create law and lobby for laws that do require companies that produce things to, in their design, make them more durable and more recyclable and less like plastic forever stuff. So there are some, that's another organization I think that's very helpful. And I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it right now.
Yeah,
okay.
no, the cyclical economy is something that we desperately need to work on pricing in, you know, full cost of impact all the way through, not just consumption but disposal and potential for recycling and other things. You know, some states that put in a bottle tax to get bottles back to get recycled, so they have a lot of bottles come back to get recycled. You know, the people paid for aluminum cans to, you know, you could collect them and get back a nickel.
That's right. Well, I want to go back to your point about happiness, because I think it's really true, and I do think we're born with curiosity and empathy, but it depends on whether or not it's cultivated. You know, the environment, you know, not just in the home, but, you know, but it's modeled, and, you know, at all levels in institutions, whether it's just school or religious institution or the government. But it seems like people are happier, and then, you know, I didn't memorize statistics about this, but they're out there, that we do, you know, it's kind of like when you get to the point where giving gifts at for a holiday brings you more pleasure than receiving them.
Right.
And I think there are many communities, like I think of so many different communities in Nepal that were incredibly giving, generous people who had, you know, almost nothing, but would offer you a piece of the, you know, last piece of roti they had if you were passing through the village and they thought you might be hungry. And I just remember being astounded by some of the poorest people in the world I had ever met being also the most generous people I never met, and having such a strong spirit. And of course I can't speak for Nepali people, but there's so many people who are from and lived in Nepal who just were incredible models of compassion and had an inner peace that I hadn't seen a lot in American communities. And I do think there's just something that we can really truly be happier beings the more the empathy is cultivated, and the more then we just develop these, you know, neural pathways and habits of giving that make us happier and sharing and not needing or wanting to consume so much.
Well, I think that's, you know, the last piece is a part of it. I go back often to when I lived in Nepal, both as a volunteer and back there later working, I would go sometimes into some of the trekking areas, when I wasn't completely off the beaten path, and be on the trekking routes in the Everest area, the Annapurna area. And I just remember sometimes being in a lodge where we knew any supplies that they had, somebody carried them in on their back for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in lodges at times, with Western tourists spending a lot of money, complaining, unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd go outside and I'd see the porters in the mountains in the cold, maybe had a shawl. At best on their feet, they had flip-flops, chappals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're all sitting around laughing. And they're having a great time.
Yeah.
And what's the lesson there? Wealth, money, consumption, acquisition, that's in so many ways, that's not in and of itself, it's not a route to happiness.
Definitely not.
But it's been inculcated, it's been held up in our societies, and Western society has had tremendous influence on, if you think of media, exportation, how many McDonald's are there around the world, or Starbucks, or Kentucky Fried Chickens. The consumption model, unfortunately, has been held up. The ultra wealthy, whether it's athletes, rap singers, business, it's held up as what's desirable, but it's perhaps not.
And it cultivated so much greed, and corporations being in the United States giving the same rights as human beings has caused a lot of problems and helped us to get to the deterioration of ecosystems.
And there isn't a community, and corporations don't have a community. Human beings, that sense of community. And it's very interesting. When I moved back to the US, I came to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's funny. It's got one of the highest rates of people who lived here, grown up here, parents, brothers, sisters. For a city, it's really got one of the highest rates of people who stay and live, and they know each other. It's not 6 degrees of separation in Pittsburgh.
I see.
Maybe 2 or 3. But there's a connectedness to it, and so many other places. I've lived all over the U.S. I remember going from the East Coast to California and marveling at how different it was, because the California communities were so transient. People were constantly moving in and out, and percentage-wise, so few were native to, had been born and grew up in California. That the connectedness was very different.
That's really important. I mean, that really makes so much difference. I'm realizing we only have a couple minutes left. I didn't give you much of a time to make a closing thought, but I'm wondering if you can just say, like, an individual level, like I often hear myself saying on this show, write your representatives, write your senators. But what can we do, like, for the people who are listening, who are U.S. Citizens or residents? What can we do to help advocate for other countries too, not just our own little areas?
Well, I think there's I kind of focus on 3 things. I like stools.
Okay.
One is choose. Do what's in your power. Choose whether you're be a conscious consumer. Consider your decisions from a broader perspective. On the impacts they have, but also the value to yourself. Add that into your choice, and think about that connection to nature, and do I want this widget, or do I want to, put some money into going on a trip and going out to the mountains or seeing a new national park or something, so choose, be conscious in your choices, reduce consumption, reduce waste where you can. The things you do get things that will last, that you'll use. Try to avoid the convenience economy. Second is to advocate. Be an advocate. We all have political representatives at every level. I'm a township council member here. We work with the town, with the county, with the state, with the national government. Contact your representatives. Call them, write them, make sure they hear your voice. They all have constituent offices. They all have ways to contact them. Challenge the status quo where it needs to be challenged. Don't just go along. Stand up. Be heard. Find similar organizations. Find similar people of similar mindset, and support organizations that are doing that kind of work. I mean, as individuals, there's so far we can go, but there are a lot of organizations out there who work to bring voices together, to amplify those voices. So look for organizations that are advocating for things you believe in, and support them. And the last thing is sort of educate. Educate yourself. Be a constant learner, and if anything in this has triggered questions, dig in a little bit. There's a lot out there, whether it's on population growth and consumption, or on ocean acidification, or the overfishing, or climate change, or habitat destruction. There's all sorts of stuff on human health. Dig in, educate yourself, learn a bit. Don't rely on someone else to feed you the information, but be a role model, and educate, and engage people around you in different forums, and talk to them, family, children, colleagues, friends. Speak up. We got one life.
Great. Speak up. We got one life. Rick Hughes, thank you so much. This was a really, really helpful conversation, and ultimately hopeful. I really, really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Bahia.
You're welcome. And a thank you to the listeners and viewers, and to our engineer Rebel, and to our producer Dean. And tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to It's Your Voice on W4CY.com or Talk4TV. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity and increase awareness. Thank you.